Have indeed, and we got a better sense as Pat Forty joins us now from Louisville as to just what games those are we need to focus on given those CFP rankings that came out last night, Pat.
We do, absolutely. A huge weekend coming up here this weekend in the SEC, and then you can look down the line and see several big games in the Pac-12 and the Big 12, a couple in the ACC, and of course, a little matter in the horseshoe come end of November in the Big 10.
That will be a big one, and of course, Michigan has a big game the weekend before that as well against Illinois, the Illini in those rankings for the first time ever. It is our big story. Let's check out the first CFP rankings of the year. Tennessee's number one for the first time ever, largely on the strength of its win over Bama, but also dismantled LSU. Ohio State checks in at 2. Georgia and Clemson round out the top 4. Michigan ends up at 5, perhaps surprisingly. One-loss Alabama is ahead of undefeated TCU. Rest of the Big Ten, Penn State's 15, and as I mentioned, Illinois in for the first time ever at number 16. There is a lot to digest here, so let's kind of break it down. Let's start with the top 5, Pat. So that takes us through Michigan, allows us to weigh in on what we think of the very top of these rankings. What stood out to you?
I was surprised that Michigan was 5 and Clemson was 4. As a matter of fact, I would have put Michigan probably 3, Ohio State 4. I'd have Tennessee, Georgia 1, 2, and I'd have Clemson 5 at best. Maybe even TCU ahead of Clemson. I think that's an argument there. But I think there's a clear message to Michigan here. We don't like your non-conference schedule. You play Colorado State, you play Hawaii, you play UConn, you drop a game against a Power 5 opponent, and you added a weak opponent. So I think that's the message there. It's certainly not prohibitive from them making the playoff. And so that's one reason I think the committee can do something like, quote-unquote, sending a message, because there's really no harm, no foul here. I think that's why Michigan is there. But I think, I've seen Michigan and Clemson in person. I've seen them on TV. I think Michigan's better than Clemson. But I think the reasoning there is all about the non-conference schedule.
I would agree. The way the Wolverines have performed up to this season, they've had a lot more game control than Clemson has. And if you want to go with the eye test, that's certainly subjective. But Michigan just looks like a better squad. I've seen some of the argument out there that, hey, Michigan's used a couple of quarterbacks, Clemson's used a couple of quarterbacks. Michigan has done it from a position of strength. The Wolverines just feel like they're a formidable enough team where they began the season with one excellent QB and Cade McNamara. J.J. McCarthy has gotten his opportunity, and he seized it and continued to lead them to this undefeated 8-0 start to the schedule. From Clemson's perspective, DJ Uiagalelei struggled in a game, and Cade Klubnik had to come in and sort of save the day for the Tigers. So this, to your point, it's going to work itself out, but I would agree. I think Michigan very easily could have been put at number 4, and it just seems to me that a lot of times, especially in these early rankings, the committee is just looking for the spice of life. They want a little bit of variety. They want it to be all SEC and Big Ten within the top 4, and, for now, Clemson at number 4 doesn't bother me too much.
And then we get the back-end justification, as we always do, of, well, look at the teams that Clemson beat. And just by coincidence, you end up with these teams between 20 and 25 with Wake, Syracuse, NC State, right? And they say, well, they have more wins over top 25 teams. Well, are you telling me that, at what point did they have the more wins over the top 25 teams? Did you do the whole top 25, have them a little bit lower, and then say, oh, well, what about these teams at the back end, and then magically raise? You determine who's at the back end of the top 25. So I always think that just kind of after-the-fact justification is totally fascinating. The one thing I do wonder about, Pat, is I wonder whether, because as you were talking about, it sends a message more broadly to Michigan about this non-conference schedule. The scenario for me where the Big Ten could get 2 in would be kind of whoever loses that Ohio State-Michigan game. If that's the only game they lose, then maybe if it's a close game, the Big Ten gets a second team in. I'm beginning to think that could only happen with Ohio State. That maybe they're sending the message with Michigan, unless they just pummel Illinois, that they're going to hold that schedule against them and they would not allow them to move up to that point with a loss. Again, there's so much that has to happen between now and then, but that's the one thing I wonder about, Pat, that rating might signify.
I mean, that's a good point. That if it's going to come down to splitting hairs, so to speak, that they've kind of made a decision there at this point in terms of Clemson and Michigan. Now, the game against Illinois, at least on paper, is probably better than anything in the regular season that Clemson has left. A Clemson-North Carolina ACC championship game might end up being better than Michigan-Illinois. But Michigan has they've got two big games left and then possibly a third. But if they don't make the Big Ten championship game, that's what we're talking about there. I want to go back briefly to your point, Dave, about kind of retrofitting the rankings and working from there. One of the problems with this whole thing is that the CFP creates an echo chamber and then bases everything on that. Well, here's our top 25, and you played these teams in top 25. Well, who says your top 25 is gospel? Where does the strength of record metric come from? They've got these ideas that they kind of cook into themselves without necessarily getting, I think, enough input from the outside world. And so, to your point, having these 3 top 25 wins, well, there are top 25. Is that the best way to do it? I'm not sure.
It's all a combination of those, and that's what makes it gives a lot of fodder for conversation. It can make it very frustrating, but there's a reason there's 13 people in the room. So in the end, if you do have some sort of an even split of the votes, at least you have an uneven number of people in there to try and determine it. But I mean, even to the eye test portion of this, there's legitimate football people in the room. Yes, some of them are athletic directors now, like Rick George played the game. I mean, Will Shields played the game. John Urschel played the game. Jim Grobe played and coached the game at a high level. There's football people in the room that, yes, it's still subjective, but it's not like there's just a bunch of executives and, white-collar folks who've never necessarily competed in this sport at a high level, and maybe we shouldn't trust their vision of what proper football looks like. In the end, we didn't like it when it was all computers. We didn't like it when it was just humans and nothing else. And this, in theory, combines the two of those amongst a larger group of people. And it's not just being left up to the media like it was back when we were kids or anything else. So I don't know what the perfect system is, but it does seem like every iteration of how we determine the national champion in college football has improved upon the previous one.
Well, I guess I would just say, and I want to get to the back end of this in a minute, but to answer your question, I'm interested in where Pat sits on this. Anyone who's watched our network for the last however many years we've been doing this, I kind of put this out there every year. I think the way you ought to use the football people is in coming up with a formula for how to do this with a computer. In other words, I just think there are too many plays. You can't tell me, even if you know everything that you're watching, there's not enough time in the day to watch every play that every single one of these teams has played.
Right, physically impossible.
We're talking about 150 plays a game times 8 teams. What is that? 1,200 plays per team times however many teams you got.
Infinite.
It's ridiculous. There's no way. And so I think what you have to do, if you say, well, I base it a lot on offensive line and defensive line play. Okay. There are metrics to tell you how good.
But those are subjective as well, though.
They
it's
are
someone
somewhat
watching film of the offensive linemen playing and determining if they thought they did a good job or not.
I hear, again, I just think if you bake all of these things in and you say, what's offensive line and defensive line play worth to you? Well, it's worth 6% of a team. Well, for me, it's worth 8% of a team. And then you go back and forth and debate that, and you come up with a formula where you have agreed upon these are the things that we care about, game control or whatever it is, right? And just say, we're going to bake all those because there's no way it is humanly possible for everyone to watch every play, certainly not people who have other jobs. And so it's so inherently subjective. But I do believe you need to lean on football people and say to them, what do you value? And let's figure out a way that we can quantify what you value.
But that sounds to me like we're leaning on football people to now come up with a metrical system.
Yes.
And so
let's combine the two. Absolutely.
But that's essentially what the committee, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, Pat, that's what the committee is supposed to already be doing. But then, I don't know, like this suggestion would sound like, Pro Football Focus, PFF College, they're obviously one of the prominent industry leaders in that space. That still sounds subjective to me, where now are you going to have someone ranking the SEC offensive lineman and someone ranking the West Coast offensive lineman, and then who's determining which defenses are really executing at the highest of levels? In the end, we still come up with a subjective system that involves a lot of human input in it.
No doubt there's going to be subjectivity, Pat, but I think just kind of broadly saying, tell me who you think is better, I just think it's a fool's errand.
I agree completely. There's a lot of ways into this thing that I think are flawed inherently in this. I will say this. I don't want a committee to sit in there and tell me whose offensive line would do better against that defensive line. I don't want you to predict what's going to happen. I want a committee that's going to look at the results, watch the games as best they can. Today's point, you cannot watch all of every game. But watch the games as best you can and say, by resume, these are the 4 teams that have earned their way in. I don't want you to sit there and say, well, I think because Ohio State can attack the outer thirds against a cover 2 that they should be in over this other team. I don't care about that. I want to know who you played, how you played, did you win or did you lose, and pick from there. So from that standpoint, hey, I'm happy to have football guys in the room, but I want people who can assess a resume fairly and adequately to come up with my playoff.
So it sounds like you like the old system better, where you just throw it into a computer and have them spit it out.
Probably. I mean, I don't think that is ironclad. I do think that there's some combination of art and science of this, of being able to appraise, but then lean on objective data, I think is really important here. And I don't think you can just have the computer spit things out, because they spit out some really ridiculous things. I can go back to 2001 when Nebraska was in the BCS championship game, when they had lost by like 30 in their last game. They should not have been there, but, well, the computer said that they had the higher ranking, so put them in there. You know, so you can't go all one way or all the other. I think there has to be a mixture.
I do want to get to once we get past the top 5 here, I mean, there's some really interesting storylines. I think TCU and Alabama is one of them, but there's a lot of them. Pat, what kind of jumped out to you beyond that top grouping?
Well, a couple things there. First of all, I think Oregon, with the 1 loss, it's a 46-point loss, but it's to a really good team. They're the second 1-loss team. They play some pretty big games still coming up. Can they fight their way in? What is the point where the committee says, you got destroyed in a game? Now, it's the first game of the year. How much does that held against them? And then you go to LSU, which was the top 2-loss team, ranked 10th. We've never had a 2-loss team in the playoff. LSU has a path to being the first one. Yeah. If they win the SEC West, if they beat Alabama this week and they win the SEC West and they win the SEC championship, I bet they get in.
I mean, they lost opening the season to Florida State. Yes, they've lost to the number 1 team in the country. In addition to that, they just haven't been that impressive, in my opinion, beyond that. So it's on their resume that they lost to UT, but they also lost to Florida State. I'm not even sure they're the best 2-loss team in the country, let alone a team that deserves to be in the top 10 at the moment. They took down Ole Miss. Why do we think Ole Miss is that great? What's on Ole Miss's resume that makes them seem like they're so exceptional either? So it just seems to me like LSU is well overranked beyond where they should be. Wouldn't have bothered me if, you beat Ole Miss, but your overall resume, your body of work, doesn't deserve to be in the top 10 if they would have kept them behind Ole Miss, because it is this sort of overall puzzle of piecing things together. But going to the other couple of teams in the Big Ten, having Penn State at 15, Illinois at 16, I do think that showed some nuance to say that even though Penn State is a 2-loss team, to still have them only 1 spot, but have them ahead of Illinois, because right now the Illini are the only team within the top 16 that haven't actually even played a squad that's ranked in the top 25. So there's still more to prove for Illinois, as exceptional as I think the Illini are. I don't mind the fact that they're saying we're going to continue to allow you to build a resume that's there, that goes beyond just the eye test of saying this may be the best defense in college football.
There's no doubt in my mind that if Illinois wins out, because that would include winning at the Big House and then beating either Michigan again or beating Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game, that they go. Like, I understand they're 16th, and again, there's only 1 team of precedent for that. But I feel like this team, with the way things lay out for them, Pat, and what they'd have to do between now and then, I still think they have a clear path to get in.
No doubt about it. They do. They've still got everything right in front of them. I was surprised they were 16th. I thought they might be higher than that. They have been very, very impressive the last few weeks. But it's there for them. If you can beat Michigan, tall task, and then either beat Michigan again or beat Ohio State, tall task, you're in. Illinois has a chance, regardless of where they're ranked at the moment.
We haven't seen a team since 2017 that's come out of the Big Ten West into the championship game and felt like this is a team that can legitimately make the college football playoff. It just hasn't been that way the last few seasons. That could be the Illini this year if they end up running the table.
It's going to be absolutely fascinating. And again, it is turning into one of the best, if not the best, story in college football. All right, we'll yell and scream about this every Wednesday, I think, going forward. More suspensions coming out of the ugly tunnel incident in Ann Arbor. Michigan State releasing a statement yesterday that read, quote, Michigan State University athletics and the football program are committed to the highest level of sportsmanship. As we continue to gather and review electronic evidence of the altercations between Michigan State and the University of Michigan student athletes, we are suspending student athletes Malcolm Jones, Justin White, Jacoby Windman, and Brandon Wright. These suspensions are effective immediately. So the total of suspended players now at 8, all on the defense. It includes 5 who have started at some point this season. Here's what Pat had to say in the 40-yard dash in SI this week. Beyond the immediate repercussions, the incident offers a wider reflection point for how everyone in college football, fans, media, coaches, players, administrators, and staffers approach these games. Maybe the whole sport could use a deep breath and consider the concept of winning and losing with some element of dignity. Pat, I don't think anyone would disagree with that, frankly, on the surface. If you do, there's something wrong with you. But how do you implement it?
Easier said than done, certainly. But I think it all has to start from leadership. There has to be an expectation that what happens on the field stops at the gun, and you have to handle yourself as adults. The adults have to help the young people handle themselves as adults, and not create an excuse-making environment or a justification, well, we got bad calls, or they didn't play with enough class, or there was a cheap shot, so we are justified in doing whatever we feel like doing in a frustrating moment. And again, like that goes to fan behavior, like the fan reaching over the stands, touching Mel Tucker on the head before the game. No, you should not do that, all right? Holding people to a high standard, I think, of being part of a team, having a ticket to a game, those sorts of things, those are controllable to a degree. Beyond that, it's a little less controllable. But you would love to see maybe a little bit less of the the school social media sites that are official sites taunting other teams when they lose. I don't think is a good look. It's kind of juvenile, and it's become pretty widespread. Maybe not as much in the Big Ten as in other leagues, but I've always thought the best way to win is to be happy for yourselves. And if you feel like saying something to the other team, just point at the scoreboard and walk off. Say, we won. Sorry for your luck. I just think there's a lot that we can all do to kind of step back and say, we could maybe handle these situations better. That is not to excuse, rationalize, or mitigate anything the Michigan State players did. But it's just one of those things that comes up. It's like, geez, maybe we can handle ourselves all a little bit better.
I think it would be spectacular if we do that. You hope there's lessons to be learned from moments like this, because you don't want ugly scenes like this. And I would say that I'm someone who, after playing the game at a high level, coaching the game at a high level for a while, that I think just through the lens of like, do you picture like your football meathead type? I don't necessarily bring that curve up. I'm a fairly mild-mannered guy by football terms, but I have had moments where you kind of toe that line on the football field. I was talking about it on the radio this morning. We played against our arch rival Iowa State. One of my first defensive series I ever played against the Cyclones. Their offensive lineman shoved me what I felt like was late, and just being wrapped up in the moment of rivalry and intensity, I balled up my fist and swung at the guy. Now, I happened to miss, and I didn't get disqualified from that game. But even someone like me who, from a temperament perspective, maybe would bring the curve down as far as just how hotly contested you kind of tend to think someone's mind is in some of these moments. But I've been through these things, and everyone's wired differently. And I think that to press for and to remind people to be as respectful as possible is 100% the way we should continue to operate. And you don't want anything like what we saw in that tunnel at the Big House, while at the same time, it's not the first time we've seen some sort of a scuffle anywhere in college football. And I think to assess how do we do this, I spoke to PJ Fleck earlier in the week. He was saying that he does have a specific system in place for his team to make sure that they don't come in contact with the opponent at certain areas. And, I think that everyone on all sides can try to make sure that we try to ensure that we're coaching the players to handle things as respectfully as possible, while at the same time recognizing that humans are flawed, and these flaws can show. And football is a violent and an emotional sport, and not everyone turns that switch off as quickly and easily as others. And I think that it's not, I don't think it's as easy as just saying that this shouldn't happen so it won't, because we have seen this line towed before.
Right, and I think to your point and to Pat's point as well, the people in charge have to set that tone. And again, this isn't the first time we've seen it in this rivalry. We've seen defacing the opponent's logo at midfield and throwing a stake down. Now, granted, I'm not trying to equate those things.
Right,
Like, this is far worse.
Far worse.
Far worse. I just want to be unequivocal when I say
that. But things can escalate.
But the tone has been set that, hey, this is an intense rivalry. We don't like them. They don't like us. And that's fine. I mean, I think that is part of what makes college football fun and different, is that these rivalries are intense and there is a genuine disdain for one another. But it has to be, the spirit of it has to be in a spirit of sportsmanship. That, yeah, we don't like them, but if they beat us fair and square, and we move on and we try to beat them next year. And I just feel like kind of the point you're making, Pat, when it comes from official social media accounts and when it comes from anywhere, the media is probably part of it too. It just exacerbates what we've already got going. And I think it almost makes young people feel like this is the way to comport yourself. And I just think the message has to be crystal clear that it strictly is prohibited.
Sure, no doubt. I mean, look, yes, young people as they come into college or are growing up, they're taking their cues from what the adults around them or leading them or what's out there in the media. That's where they're learning and socializing from. And so, yeah, if we are not comporting ourselves in a way we think that we should, then guess what? They're probably not going to either. So modeling behavior, modeling expectations, I think those things are really important. Anthony made some great points there. Where like you get into a big football game and the emotions are running so high that it is not easy to just, be instantaneously sportsmanlike. But when it ends, first of all, go to your locker room, get in your locker room, stay in your locker room. But secondly, that's where you need support staff, coaches, whatever, to say, look, okay, the game is over. Mm-hmm. It ends now. We got to go our separate ways and move on. And we can't just sit here and throw a temper tantrum, get violent, blame the officials, whatever, okay? And again, it's got to start from the top down, from the adults in charge.
And, the Big House in Ann Arbor, it's not the only football stadium that has a singular tunnel where both opponents enter and exit from. They do have a halftime sort of protocol that's in place that says one team gets to take the tunnel first and the other doesn't. It's not the same protocol that's in place. Michigan hasn't done anything wrong as far as we can tell in this scenario. And I think both coaches have said the right things since then. It doesn't mean it's not worthy of examination for how do we put some sort of a protocol in place in all segments, pregame, halftime, postgame, that would lessen the possibility of a moment like this occurring again.
I think it's just sad because the Big House has been there for roughly 100 years, and it's always had one tunnel.
Right, but I think it's worthy of pointing out, cell phone cameras have been around for about a decade, so I'm not going to assume that there's never been a scuffle in the tunnel at the Big House before.
That's fair. I guess I just feel like we ought to be mature enough that we can figure out a way to get both teams through the tunnel. No, I know, and you've been out there and I haven't, and I get all of that, and I understand.
I wish we were as well, but I've been there.
And so put a protocol in place. Yes. So let's put a protocol in place to what we were saying here, and this is the way we'll do it. But to blame the tunnel is ridiculous. The tunnel's been there a long time. Pat, we'll give you the last word on this.
Well, I agree completely. I mean, I've had people say, build another tunnel. Okay, let's spend millions of dollars to correct something that really is correctable already, okay? We don't have to do that. We can figure out a way, whether it's protocol or whether it's consequences for behavior like that, one way or the other. To Anthony's point, hey, I remember sometime in, I believe, the 1970s when Ohio State came out of that tunnel with the Go Blue banner and tore down the banner coming out of there that was up for the Michigan players, but they came out first and took that thing down. So, yeah, things can happen and have happened. But to blame the physical structure of the stadium is just to simply sidestep any accountability for acting better. That's my thing.
But it doesn't mean we shouldn't assess if there's a way to try and alleviate the possibility that this would happen again. It's not the tunnel's fault. Michigan hadn't done anything wrong. Doesn't mean that everybody shouldn't come together and try to figure out how do we alleviate that, as opposed to just saying everybody behave better in these situations where you've been in conflict for the last 4 hours, so you should just behave well afterwards. That expectation is great, but it is imperfect.
Agree 100%. Right. Yeah, I both things can be true,
Yeah.
and I think we're in one of those situations. The state, as we've already documented, is shorthanded. Illinois clearly seems like the better team, but also have the game looming the next week against Purdue. They've got a couple big showdowns coming up here. We've already mentioned the Michigan game, so maybe need to guard a little bit against looking ahead. What stands out in that matchup to you?
Well, from the Spartans' perspective, it's going to be a lot of young players, especially on defense, that will now have opportunities to hit the field. And it's obviously an awkward week, a difficult week for Mel Tucker to figure out how do you move on from that gruesome incident from the tunnel last week and try to prepare your team to play this game and the successive games that are going to come here. And I think that's a part of the message that needs to be communicated to some of the youth that will be in the lineup with the suspensions that Michigan State's going through. This is an opportunity for guys who haven't gotten that much run on the field yet to see if perhaps they can enter the lineup, they can make plays, because frankly the defense for the Spartans hasn't been great this year, regardless of that. And for the Illini, what I'm curious about with Illinois, especially now that we're in college football playoff mode, is there another gear for the Illini offense? You got the nation's leading rusher. You've got one of the more efficient passers in college football. It's an offense for Illinois that I do think has more chunk plays in the passing game available to it that they can access with the way that Tommy DeVito's throwing the football, with Isaiah Williams and Pat Bryant at wide receiver, even a deep slew of tight ends that they can work with as well. I'm really curious if Illinois in the month of November, this first game of November, could be a nice little testing ground for them to see. Maybe 35-plus pass attempts for Tommy DeVito in the game. We haven't seen him do that much this year. I'm wondering, what is the ceiling for their offense? Because if we're thinking really big picture, kind of macro terms, that can take them further.
One thing that does bother me with them offensively is in the red zone they have struggled. They are 13th in the Big Ten in red zone touchdown percentage, which seems a little strange given that you've got a really good running back, a very accurate quarterback, but for whatever reason haven't been able to put all that together when they get down close. How about for you in that game, Pat?
Yeah, I'm probably looking a little more at intangibles, obviously, and somewhat to Anthony's point there, where, Michigan State, where's your character? Can you rally? Can you regroup in the face of some big losses of personnel, in the face of a national embarrassment, and show up and say, this is what we're really about, and play really hard? I'm not saying you win, but you show up and give it 60 minutes of real serious effort and let the chips fall where they may after that. From Illinois' standpoint, boy, the stakes are going up and up.
Yeah.
Are you ready for it? I think they are. I was there last week. I talked to a bunch of their players and their coaches, and I just got a sense about them that they're not in over their heads. They're not like walking around wide-eyed like, oh my gosh, we've hit the big time. So I think they're able to stay pretty grounded, but you got to go now and handle a little bit increasing pressure. You're supposed to win this game. Then you're supposed to go into the Big West showdown with Purdue. Then you're supposed to have the big game against Michigan. Can you keep your eyes on the prize this week and just go out and execute in a high level?
I'm with you, too. I think they're ready for this. That was the impression we got when we were there in the preseason. I know you've spent some time around them this year, too. It does seem like a really level-headed group, and I think even though the players individually haven't been there before, the coach has. And he really does a great job of setting the tone with this group.
Being able to handle expectations, it can be a difficult thing. For athletes at any level, this Illini squad, though, they do seem to have a unique temperament that suits this. But we've seen it up to this point. I was curious how they would handle things coming off the bye week after they'd been patted on the back for a while. It does feel like this is a squad that continues to be able to drive each other to know that eye of the tiger that you need to have if you're going to continue to get better, to improve at the task. Illinois seems to have it.
And they are at home where they've been fabulous this year. They've been really good everywhere, but they've allowed 2 touchdowns at home this year. What about Maryland and Wisconsin? The Badgers need to win 2 of 4 down the stretch here, Pat, to continue their bowl streak, which is at 20 in a row, the second longest in Big Ten history. They're facing a Maryland team that it sounds like is going to get Leah Tagovailoa back. They are playing really well. What interests you about this one?
Super intriguing on both sides of this. Maryland is right there on the cusp, it seems like, of a breakthrough up to that next level of not just being kind of a 500 team, but stepping up, win 7, 8, 9 games possibly, and really kind of raising the level of where the program has gone and can go with Mike Loxley. And then we have Wisconsin. Hey, for Jim Leonhard, this is a big one. They've been up and down with Leonhard. They've had a couple very impressive performances. They let one get away completely against Michigan State. Keep it going on track, and how much more does that enhance his chances of keeping that job full-time? I think Wisconsin would love to hire him as the full-time coach. He's just got to give him a few more reasons to do it.
It's an opportunity for Maryland. Wisconsin's not a ranked squad, but like you referenced, Pat, 2 out of their last 3 games under Jim Leonhard's leadership, they've been able to win those. And I'm intrigued by Maryland from this perspective because we view them as this finesse team. We view them as this cute team with the passing attack. But Mike Loxley and Dan Enos, they told us coming into the season that they love this offensive line. This would give them a different look, and the run game has been there. Can they continue to surge going into the month of November? When I call this game this Saturday on the Big Ten Network, that's what I'm going to watch most closely, the line of scrimmage, because it's a Wisconsin line of scrimmage, both on the O-line and the D-line. It's not quite up to Badger standards. And this is a Maryland squad that if they win this game, they should be in the national rankings next week. You can make a case they already could have been and should have been in the top 25 in last night's rankings. So how great is Maryland? It's not just about the growth of the quarterback. I spoke to Tar Heap Still this morning. He said Talia Tagovailoa looks like his old self, but he didn't want to make any proclamations about whether or not he would play in the game, but he thinks he looks great in practice. I expect big things from Maryland's QB. Can they go toe-to-toe? Can they control the line of scrimmage against the Badgers? That'll tell me a lot about what the month of November will look like for the Terps.
Yeah, to your point, Wisconsin has always run the ball this year as well as they have historically. This is a Maryland team that'll give up some yards in the run game. We saw Northwestern go over 200 on them last time they played. That is not a Northwestern team that runs the ball particularly well. And then defensively, they haven't really been statistically up to the level of where they've been historically, Wisconsin, on the defensive front. So there's some vulnerability there on both sides of the line. We'll see whether Maryland can take advantage of it. Today's big stat focusing on the pass defenses. Illinois continues to play exceptional D, have allowed just 3 passing TDs on the year. Not only is that the fewest in the Big Ten, as you see, it's actually the fewest in the nation. Georgia is next with 5. See the rest of the Big Ten list. Illinois and Michigan, by the way, number 1 and 2 in the nation in pass efficiency defense. It is time for the Impact 5. We are counting down the top 5 secondaries in the Big Ten. Where are you starting, Anthony?
Well, starting at number 5, it's a squad that's been growing throughout the year, I would say. I had some concerns about what I saw early in the season from the Wisconsin Badgers, and with good reason. But as they've gone week by week, one thing that we've seen, even when they give up big explosive pass plays, the Badgers under Jim Leonhard, he continues to call the defensive plays for them, we see a squad that can take the football away. They will set fire to any offense out there in the torch. John Torchio on the back end is the main cog in that. Beyond him, you don't necessarily have a lot of guys who've made excessive amounts of plays on the football back there, but he is such a field general on the back end for them. And then they mix in a variety of coverages. It's not just zone the entire time. They'll throw some fire zones at you with some man on the back end, with some zone concepts on the back end. And as they've gotten more and more experience, they have been able to make it more difficult for the opposing offense. And they've got really good ball skills back there.
They are tied for second in the nation, as you said, in interceptions. They've also given up 31 pass plays of 20 yards or longer, which is the second most in the Big Ten. So interesting choice there. Where would you go with number 4?
At number 4, it's a squad that I didn't necessarily envision this backfield, I suppose, worthy of my top 5 earlier in the season. But another growing secondary is the Michigan Wolverines. And part of this is because you had newness on the back end. You're trying to figure out, all right, what was Mike McDonald doing last season? It worked really well in concert with that pass rush. This year, the pass rush statistically has still been great, but you don't necessarily have someone up front that the opponents have to game plan for. But on the back end, we have seen what Steve Klingscale, what Jesse Minter have been able to do with that Wolverine secondary, a variety of experience and inexperience. And what I love is that we've seen Michigan get to a point now where they're more physical in coverage on the back end than they were earlier in the year. Makes all the difference in the world when you're willing to go up and challenge wide receivers. Their pattern match is enhancing throughout the year as well. And so any growth that we're seeing from Michigan, I would say is as much of the expectations I had for the Wolverine offense because of the experience that returned there, I would say Michigan's defense is where things are really growing more and more throughout the season here. They make life so difficult on the opponent, even on downs where maybe the pass rush isn't getting all the way home. You see the windows closing with the way they operate in the secondary.
And as you say, that pressure up front makes such a difference. They lead the Big Ten in sacks, and the less time you have to get rid of the football, the better your secondary is going to look. So they're number 4. Who's number 3?
I'm going to go to Iowa City for number 3 in this conference. And, obviously for the Hawkeyes defense, they have an offense that puts them in some difficult scenarios, down and distance and everything else. And they're so deep up front on the defensive line. But the secondary for Iowa, even where Riley Moss, the returning Big Ten Defensive Back of the Year, not out there making interceptions every snap, but his game has improved for the way that he supports the run, for the way that when he's on the back end. One thing his defensive coordinator, Phil Parker, wanted him to improve at this season was the recognition of route combinations, and he's become so much better in that regard this year. But then you also have a thumper in the middle, like Kayvon Merriweather. And so he's a guy who can you set your physical tone on the back end. And then when you look at the statistic for Iowa, number 2 in yards per attempt, number 4 in pass efficiency defense, they do a great job just making every blade of grass on the field really difficult for the opponent because you're not sure whether they go man or zone, where they're going to end up. And they run more man concepts than people probably give the Hawkeyes credit for. Just when they go with what we term as quarters coverage, it turns into man. So there's zone concepts, but within sort of a man structure of Iowa's defense that's made them a really effective secondary.
Have been really good statistically, and as always, they just don't give up the big plays. 14 of 20 yards or longer. That is the second fewest of any team in the country. Who's number 2?
Now, I would say this is actually, when we got to the top 2, I found this to be a more difficult task than folks may have anticipated. I'm going to put Penn State at number 2 here in my Impact 5 because of the tenacity they play the game with. They just invade the personal space of the opponent in such a consistent way. And when I'm talking growth for some of these other teams, Penn State, with the amount of man coverage that they play, to be able to take the ball away at the rate that they do is exceptional. You're looking at Joey Porter Jr. over my shoulder as a corner. He's about that size. He's a very long-limbed defensive back who flips his hips really well in coverage. You got Jair Brown, one of the more versatile safeties in all of college football. But then you also have other players around them that make plays at a high level as well. And for them, they're number 3 in pass efficiency defense, number 4 in opponent completion percentage. This is a squad that's doing a lot this season, and it's enhanced by the way that Manny Diaz calls the game. He's willing to be aggressive. He's willing to allow them to get downhill. And so you see them able to attack opponents both mentally and physically.
They've broken up 60 passes. Not only is that the most in the country, it's the most in the country by 15. It's not even close. That being said, Illinois is so far and away statistically the best pass defense in the country. I think it'll almost be impossible not to put them at number 1.
And everything comes together so well for the Illini with the way that, yes, a lot of it is man concepts that you see Ryan Walters running, but when you actually watch them on film, and just everything is contested for the Illini. There's absolutely no chill in the way that Illinois plays defense, and a lot of it is led by the back end. You get all the energy from the defensive front with the way that they attack people with the D-line, but they don't have to blitz to get home. And so sometimes it looks like there's 13 defenders on the field for Illinois because there are so many hands in every which way that the quarterback is looking to throw the football. And so it's why they lead the nation in yards per game. They lead the nation in interceptions. They lead the Big Ten in pass efficiency defense. And like you said, a lot of these categories by a wide margin. And when you can do that in every phase, when you say, you're not going to throw the deep ball on us, we're going to be able to intercept it, we're going to challenge you with man coverage, everything you expect and you hope for from a top flight secondary, the Illini have shown they can get that done, and it's across the board, man. I mean, Devin Witherspoon might be the Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year, but you know what? Sidney Brown could be in that conversation. Taz Nicholson could be a part of that discussion. They play at such a high level everywhere across the back end.
You mentioned they lead the Big Ten in pass efficiency defense. They lead the nation in pass efficiency defense, and it's not even close. I've been tracking this stat all year just because it's jumping out at me. The gap between them at number 1 and the team that is at number 2 is the same as the gap between number 2 and number 41 in the nation. That's how much they lead the nation by. It's
incredible.
Staggering how good they are. And again, teams are completing 44% against them. I mean, I can't get over how good
And
they've
they've
been.
seen offenses like with a legitimate pulse. Like Indiana's offense can challenge you. Virginia's offense can challenge you. They have shut down some really top-flight offenses.
Pat, we always give you the chance at a rebuttal. Where are you going here?
Not very far. I think it's a really good list. I think the top three are the top three for sure. I give Iowa maybe a little more credit than Penn State just because, to Anthony's point of, they've had to do a lot of work, all right? The offense just doesn't help them out very much. It's not a lot of complementary football for the Hawkeyes, and that defense still has held up extremely well, including on the back end. I love the sheer talent and the aggressiveness of Penn State's secondary. They've got 2 NFL guys back there, and they do. They grab, they push, they hold, they sometimes hit late, they get in your head. It's effective for them. I don't blame them at all for what they do. I just think Iowa's defense has probably been handled a little bit tougher sledding and done awfully well. Illinois, absolutely number 1.
Yeah, I think I might put someone other than Wisconsin at number 5. Like, I think Rutgers is a really good secondary. Ohio State obviously is very good.
I don't want to discount the rate that Wisconsin takes it away at, though. That's a huge deal, especially when your offense is uneven. Rutgers was definitely under consideration there. Even Purdue, frankly, but the way Wisconsin takes the ball away, they give up chunk plays, but when you can take it away from the opponent, that turns the tide of games.
Wisconsin and Purdue give up too many big plays for my liking.
Both of them.
But yeah. Anyway. Full slate, not just this Saturday, but every Saturday from here on in. Already mentioned the Big Ten Network games. Elsewhere, Iowa visits Purdue. Northwestern hosts Ohio State. Minnesota at Nebraska, and Penn State traveling to Bloomington. Iowa and Purdue is a big one, Anthony. The Boilers need this one to stay in the West race. We were talking about Wisconsin's bowl streak earlier. Iowa's qualified for 9 straight bowls. There was one that was canceled, but they want to keep that streak going. They need a couple wins to get there. What stands out in this one?
Well, certainly the Charlie Jones angle here is an interesting one,
isn't it? Yeah.
Without a doubt. And I mean, Purdue's kind of been the Iowa defense's kryptonite for several seasons now. A lot of that can be credited to David Bell and what he was able to do with over 200 receiving yards. It felt like 2,000 receiving yards per game that he was averaging. But you still got Aiden O'Connell in there at quarterback, and you do have Charlie Jones in there at wide receiver. So the familiarity on both sidelines will be fun to watch that play out. But how does Jeff Brom go about this? I'm really intrigued by that. And apparently the weather conditions are expected to not necessarily be favorable to throwing the football. It's going to be like 40-mile-an-hour winds perhaps in West Lafayette this weekend. So did Jeff Brom try to utilize some of this new balance to the Purdue offense that I had given up on years ago, but now you do have a true running game, not a dominant rushing attack, but a legitimate rushing attack. So do you say we're going to try to outbalance and outgame manage the Hawkeyes? Maybe our football can be more complementary than theirs? Or do you say, you know what? I got it dialed up. I know what my team can do against this defense, and it's worked really well for them in the past.
Just been so up and down offensively here in recent games, really done in by the turnovers in that game against Wisconsin. What stands out to you in that one, Pat?
Yeah, I think the point about the weather conditions is really interesting. I think if you're Purdue, you got to be flexible going right up to game day and say, what's it going to be? Can we throw into this or not? They have been better and more multidimensional being able to run the ball, but gosh, Iowa's a tough team to run it against. You're going to have to be, I think Purdue's going to have to be patient and just take 4 yards, take 6 yards on the passing game, whatever, and see what you can do as far as moving it, and then try to win a field position game occasionally against the king of field position, Kirk Ferentz. So, I mean, it doesn't shape up as an easy game for Purdue, even though I think Purdue in a vacuum is a better team.
Iowa yet to allow, I should say, more than 361 total yards in a game. And so you think about how high turbo this offense is for Purdue. This will be a huge challenge for them against the Hawkeyes.
And Iowa's got an offense now, right?
Well.
Right? No?
Yeah, well,
maybe?
I don't know.
Maybe.
We'll see. I mean,
maybe Iowa's got an offense now.
Wasn't the greatest competition. I do think maybe it gives them, we talked about this a little yesterday, maybe it gives them some confidence going forward.
It's a big deal.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, again, maybe you carry that forward. Do want to get a quick thought on Minnesota and Nebraska. What do you think there, Pat?
Hey, P.J. Fleck has made his mark by dominating Nebraska 4 out of the last 5 years. That's been big for Minnesota's program. It's been bad for Nebraska's. That was one of the biggest problems for Scott Frost. So, I think that they have a physical advantage. They're bigger, they're stronger, they're tougher than Nebraska has been. Nebraska has played a little better in recent weeks under Mickey Joseph, but I think this sets up well again for Minnesota and a program that has continued to push itself forward towards the upper half of that West Division.
And Mickey Joseph has said recently that they're not necessarily chasing the Minnesotas and Wisconsins of the world. They're chasing Ohio State. But in the end, to Pat's point, Minnesota's dominated this series lately. So you do want to put yourself in a position where if you're going to make your mark, have a legitimate chance at this job, it's another opportunity here to say that Mickey Joseph has made an impact on this program that allows him to do something that the previous regime was not able to.
And it sounds like they may not have Casey Thompson at quarterback, and that is going to make it much more challenging. It just feels like it kind of plays into Minnesota's strengths, which is controlling the ball, keeping their offense on the field, getting Nebraska.
They want to control it for 61 minutes, if that's possible for the Gophers. That's their goal in most games. I don't know if it's on the board, but it's what they try to do.